The sun leaned low across the prairie when Eli Markham rode into the town of Whistle Hollow, half-starved and shaking in his saddle. His horse, more bone than muscle, limped with a cough. Dust clung to Eli's coat like guilt, and his boots were cracked open at the seams. He hadn't eaten since the storm 3 days ago, hadn't spoken to a soul in 2. The town looked like it hadn't changed in 20 years, and maybe that's what he needed, a place stubborn enough to forget time. Children playing marbles in the alley went quiet when they saw him. A shopkeeper paused mid-sweep, eyes narrowed beneath his brim. Eli didn't blame them. A man that hollowed out tends to bring trouble, and he wasn't dressed like someone with a future. He tethered the horse outside the saloon but didn't go in. He couldn't afford a drink, let alone a fight. Instead, he staggered to the bench outside the livery and sat like a sack of wet flour, listening to the wind scrape over empty windows. Voices drifted from the barber shop next door, men laughing low, sharing something sharp and sour. Says she'll take a husband if he wants shelter. Poor fool's gotta be half blind or half dead. That old crone still breathin' out on Wren's Hill? 71 and meaner than hornets in whiskey. Heard she boards up her windows at night and talks to ghosts. Eli didn't move. Not until one of the men added, she said she don't need love, just a name to sign beside hers. He stood. Hunger clawed louder than pride now. A warm roof sounded better than a cold death. He found the house on the edge of town, just where the prairie buckled into a shallow rise. A whitewashed fence sagged along the perimeter. The garden out front was dead, but the porch was swept clean, and the rocking chair didn't rock unless someone made it. She opened the door before he could knock. She wasn't what he expected. Florence Whitlow stood thin as a fence post, wrapped in a blue shawl that matched the sky behind her. Her silver hair was braided tight, pinned at the nape, and her eyes were the color of chipped slate. Sharp, not tired. She didn't ask who he was. "You're late," she said. "I wasn't invited." Still late. She stepped aside. "Come in." The inside of the house smelled like lemon oil and wood smoke. A single lamp glowed on a low table. No clutter. No warmth. The walls were bare except for one faded portrait of a man in uniform. Civil War, Eli guessed. The man stared past him like he'd seen too much and spoken too little. Florence moved with purpose, setting a chipped bowl on the table. Stew. Not hot, but edible. Eli didn't ask where the meat came from. She sat across from him, folding her hands. "Name." He swallowed thickly. "Eli Markham." "Got sins, Eli?" He looked up. "You offering a preacher or a bed?" "Neither," she said. "Just wondering what's coming through my door." He stared back, tired of lying. "Left a war, lost a brother, stole a horse once, though I gave it back. I drink when I can, lie when I must, and sometimes I dream of drowning even when there's no water." Her lips twitched, almost a smile. "Good. Better than a man who thinks he's clean." He finished the stew in 3 silent minutes. She slid a folded paper across the table. "Marriage license. Already signed. Just needs your name." "No preacher?" he asked. "I've got my land, my house, my peace. Don't need God to make it legal. Just your hand." He signed. That night, he slept in a bed for the first time in months. Soft mattress, patched quilt. Outside, the wind whispered through bare branches. Somewhere in the walls, he heard her bolting the front door. Then another lock. Then another. At midnight, he woke with a jolt. A creak beneath the floor. A breath not his own. He rose, heart pounding, and stepped into the hallway. The air was thick with quiet. Her voice startled him. "Don't wander. This house has rules." She stood at the end of the hallway, wrapped in shadow, a candle in her hand. "Sorry," he muttered. "Didn't mean to. I said no wandering." The next morning, she gave him a list. "Chop the wood. Patch the roof. Feed the hens. And don't go near the cellar. Don't ride into town unless I say. Don't ask about the shed behind the barn. Don't look for what's buried. And don't open locked doors." He read the list twice. You always this welcoming to your husbands? You're not my husband. You're a roof plug. I married you to fill a hole. Keep the cold out. He said nothing. There was nothing to say. Days passed. He did the work. She barely spoke. Yet something in the silence was companionable, like two wolves sharing a cave. He fixed the roof, chopped the wood, and discovered the hens had stopped laying years ago. Still, she made him collect the straw and clean the coop like they mattered. He asked her once, over cold cornbread, why she hadn't just hired help. Help don't stay, she said. They see things, hear things. You, she studied him. You look like a man who's already seen worse. He didn't argue. On the 5th day, he found her sitting by the garden, fingers in the soil though nothing grew. She wasn't weeping, just watching the horizon like it might change. He sat beside her, hands raw from fence wire. You ever been in love? She didn't look at him. I was 17 when I married. Wore lace I stitched myself. Silas Whitlow was handsome, didn't talk much. He was shot 3 times and still came home whistling. Then one night, he rode out and didn't come back. She picked at the dirt. I waited a year. Then 2. Then I stopped marking days. But I kept the door locked. You keep enough locks, no one really leaves. He stared at her thin hands. Did they ever find him? No, a pause. But he found me. In dreams. In the squeak of the floor. In a letter that came 5 winters ago and said nothing but my name. He shivered, but not from cold. That night, he dreamed of a cellar door creaking open and a shadow in a soldier's coat climbing the stairs. The next day, he tried to leave. He saddled the horse before dawn, intent on riding to town for whiskey or peace. Something with edges. But when he reached the gate, Florence stood there, holding a small box. You forgot this, she said. He opened it. Inside was his father's old harmonica, lost years ago in a fire. Burned along the edge, still scratched with initials. He stared at her. How? I have my ways, she said. You're not the only one with ghosts, Eli Markham. He didn't ride to town. He sat on the porch, holding the harmonica, not playing it. Just breathing. And when the wind kicked up, he didn't flinch. On the 7th day, she brought him to the back shed. Unlocked the rusted latch. Inside was a trunk. She knelt beside it, fingers trembling. I kept this closed for 40 years. Thought maybe I'd open it with someone who'd understand. Eli hesitated, then knelt beside her. She opened it slowly. What was inside would change everything. The trunk creaked open like it hadn't seen daylight since the war. Dust leapt from its seams, dancing in the sunbeam that broke through the cracks in the shed wall. Eli braced himself, for bones, for bullets, for something unholy, but what he saw made him still. Letters. Dozens of them. Tied with a faded red ribbon. A uniform, folded with reverence, bore the insignia of a Union major. Beneath it, a revolver wrapped in oilskin. A silver locket lay atop it all. Florence didn't speak. Her hands hovered above the contents, trembling not with fear but with memory. She picked up the locket first and opened it with a soft click. Inside, 2 portraits. Her, young and glowing, beside her Silas. His face the same as the portrait in the parlor, only less haunted. I used to wear this every day, she said quietly. Stopped after the letter came. Eli reached for the stack of envelopes. The handwriting was precise, military. All addressed to Florence Wren Whitlow. That was his name, she said. Silas Wren. Whitlow came after. After what? She didn't answer. Instead, she rose, dusting off her skirt. Come. There's more you should see. Back in the house, she led him to the cellar door, one of the locks she'd told him never to touch. Without a word, she unlocked it with a key from her apron and opened it. The smell hit him first, damp earth, old wood, something metallic beneath. Bring a lamp, she said. He did. They descended slowly, wooden stairs groaning beneath their weight. The air thickened. It wasn't a large space, just wide enough to crouch, but the walls had been hand-dug, and shelves lined one side, crammed with canned peaches, empty jars, and boxes. Wooden, nailed shut. 6 of them. Eli crouched. One of the boxes had initials carved into it. Not SW, but TB, JM, HC. "Who are they?" he asked. Her voice was low, unsteady. "Men who came here for gold." Silas had a claim. They wanted it. When he refused, they turned on him. Said they'd wait till I was alone. Eli's mouth went dry. "And they came back?" "They did. One at a time, like scavengers. Thought an old widow'd be easy pickings." She looked at him then, eyes steel. They were wrong. He stared at the boxes again. "You buried them here? Better than feeding the coyotes." "Why keep them?" he asked. She stepped past him, touched one gently. "Reminders. Every nail, every name. Proof I wasn't helpless." He felt a cold weight press down on him. Not fear exactly, but the knowledge that this woman was nothing like he'd assumed. She wasn't brittle. She was forged. She shut the cellar door behind them and bolted it again. He couldn't sleep that night. The wind howled louder. The house, old and worn, seemed to breathe with secrets. In the hallway, he paused by the locked room near hers, the one that hadn't been opened once since he arrived. He touched the doorknob. It was cold. Then, footsteps behind him. "You still don't listen well," Florence said softly. He turned. "What's in there?" She hesitated. "What's left of me." The next morning, he tried to work like usual. Chopping wood, mending fence rails. But everything felt different now. The house was no longer just shelter, it was a vault, and he was sleeping inside it. At lunch, she slid a plate to him. Biscuits and salted ham. "You ever kill anyone?" she asked. He looked up, jaw tensing. "You know I have. For war or for yourself?" Eli didn't answer. Florence nodded as if he had. "I figured." There was a long silence. Finally, he said, "Why me? Why not some drifter with fewer ghosts?" She tilted her head. "You looked like a man who wouldn't run screaming." That night, he played the harmonica outside. Not a song, just a note, soft and low, echoing through the twilight. Behind him, the porch creaked. She sat beside him, blanket draped over her shoulders. "Silas used to play," she said. "Only after whiskey, and never in tune." He handed it to her. She shook her head. "I've outlived too many songs." He tried again. "What happened to the gold?" She smiled faintly. "Still buried. They never found it. Silas hid it too well. And I never needed it. Land was enough. But now you brought me here. Married me. You're unlocking trunks, letting me see what others never did." "Because I'm tired," she admitted. "And I think someone else ought to remember." They sat quietly. The next few days passed in uneasy calm. Eli kept busy. He felt something shifting inside him. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was watching, listening. He noticed when Florence limped more than usual, when her hands shook as she poured tea, when she stopped locking the shed. One morning, while fixing a loose hinge on the barn, he spotted movement near the trees beyond the pasture. Just a flicker, too tall for a coyote, too quiet for a neighbor. He didn't tell her right away. Instead, he stayed up that night, rifle across his lap. At 2 a.m, he saw a lantern glow in the woods, then vanish. The next day he asked, "You told anyone I was here?" "No." "You been into town?" "Only once. 3 weeks ago." He nodded. She leaned forward. "What did you see?" He told her. She didn't flinch. "They'll come," she said. "They always do when they think I'm weak." "I'm not going anywhere," he replied. She gave him a long look. Then you better be ready to bleed. That night, she unlocked the mystery room. He followed her inside. Canvas paintings leaned against the walls, dozens of them. Scenes of the prairie, of a man on a horse, of a soldier kissing a girl beneath a willow tree. Her voice broke as she said, "I painted him every year after he vanished. Not how he looked, but how I needed to remember him." Eli reached for one, the newest. It wasn't Silas. It was him. Standing by the gate, rifle in hand, wind in his coat. "I started it 3 nights ago," she whispered. "Didn't know why until now." He turned toward her, something knotting in his chest. "They'll come soon," she said. "And we'll be ready," he replied. Outside, the wind carried dust across the land like whispers from the past. The snow came early that year, a thin dusting that blanketed the hills like ash over memory. Eli watched it fall from the porch, one hand on his coffee, the other resting lightly on the rifle leaning beside him. Florence had gone quiet again, not with fear, but with focus. She moved differently now. Every step, every breath, carried the weight of knowing something was coming. It had been 3 days since he'd spotted the lantern flicker beyond the north pasture. He hadn't seen it again, but the silence that followed felt more dangerous than movement. It was the kind of stillness predators knew to trust. He asked her again about the gold. She finally answered. "Silas never planned to keep it," she said, kneeling by the hearth as she stirred the fire. "He wanted to buy back land. Land they stole from families in debt. He said if a man finds something good in the ground, he ought to put it back in the people who walk on it." Eli crouched beside her. "Then why hide it?" "Because men don't care about purpose, only profit. They killed him before he could do anything with it." Eli looked at her hand, scarred from work, steady even in grief. "And you protected it?" "For a while. Then I buried the memory with it." She stood and fetched a small pouch from behind the clock mantel. Inside was a torn scrap of leather with a sketched map, faint hills, a tree marked with an X, and a shallow creek labeled Wren's Teeth. "It's still out there," she said. "And now it's yours." He blinked. "You want me to take it?" "I want you to choose. You can dig it up and ride away. Or you can stay and fight for something better than silver." He folded the leather slowly and placed it in his coat pocket. "I'm not going anywhere." The next morning, he found boot prints in the fresh snow near the shed. Not his. Not hers. 4 sets. One limped. They were being watched. Florence wasn't surprised when he told her. She stood at the window, gazing toward the hills. "They waited for me to get old. Thought maybe time would rot my spine. It didn't." Eli loaded the rifle slowly. "We need to set traps." She smiled faintly. "Already did." That night, they moved like ghosts. Through the property, resetting snares, stringing cowbells along fence posts, laying nails beneath the barn window. Eli had done this before, during raids along the Missouri border. But back then, he had orders. Now he had only her. And something about that made it feel more real. Afterward, they sat in the kitchen, oil lamp flickering between them. He watched her twist her wedding ring, a habit she only did when thinking of death. "I never meant to bring you into this," she said. "I married you for safety, for the idea of a man standing beside me, even if only in name." He sipped from the bottle between them. "And now," she looked up, "now I wonder if I married you too late." They heard the first shot just after midnight. It wasn't aimed. Just a warning, ripped through the silence like a knife across paper. Eli grabbed the rifle and kicked open the door, heart hammering. Snow glowed under the moonlight. Shadows shifted by the fence line. A second shot. Closer. Florence was already by the kitchen window, revolver in hand. She didn't flinch. "They're testing the ground," she said. "Seeing if we'll run." "We won't." They waited. The men came at dawn. 4 of them. Covered in wool and grease, rifles slung, boots heavy. One wore a red scarf around his neck. The leader. He stepped forward, calm as a banker, and raised a gloved hand. "Mornin', ma'am," he called. "Mighty sorry to come uninvited." Florence stood beside Eli at the porch rail, coat drawn tight, eyes colder than the wind. "State your business," she said. The man smiled. "Heard a widow lived here with a fortune buried under her cabbages." "No cabbages," she replied. "Well now," he chuckled, "maybe we dig anyway." Eli cocked the rifle. The man didn't blink. "Easy, friend. No need for mess. Just give us what we came for, and we'll be on our way." Florence stepped forward. "What you came for's already buried. And you'll join it if you take one more step." The man's smile faltered. Then he signaled. Gunfire erupted. Eli dropped behind the porch post and returned fire. One of the men stumbled back, howling. Florence ducked into the house, glass shattering around her as bullets tore through the window panes. Everything moved in flashes: white snow, red blood, black smoke. Eli sprinted to the side of the house, caught one bandit circling wide, and fired. The man dropped like a sack of coal. From inside, Florence shot through the curtain. Another man fell screaming, clutching his leg. Only one remained now, the leader with the red scarf. He vanished into the woods. The silence after was louder than the bullets. Eli searched the tree-line, but the man was gone. Back in the house, Florence leaned against the wall, hand pressed to her side. Blood stained her coat. "Not deep," she said through her teeth. "Just enough to remind me I'm alive." He helped her to the chair. They didn't speak for a while. Just sat there, breathing, listening to the wind howl approval. Later, Eli dragged the bodies to the well and dropped them in. He stood over the third one, the one with a blue tattoo on his neck. "I saw this man once," he said. "Years ago, south of Dodge. He rode with a crew called the Sinkhole Boys." Florence nodded. "They used to work with the ones who killed Silas. They're all connected." "Why'd they wait so long?" "Because I stayed quiet. Quiet women get forgotten. But I made the mistake of asking about mining rights last month. Got folks remembering." He crouched beside the corpse. "They'll send more. Then we make it harder." That night, she stitched her wound without complaint. Eli cooked supper, beans and stale bread, and poured 2 glasses of bourbon. "You still want me to find the gold?" he asked. "I want you to know what you're protecting." She pulled another item from the trunk, a deed. Silas's name, the claim's coordinates, all stamped and notarized. "If we lose this land, they get the mine. If we hold it, we decide what happens next." He studied the paper, then looked at her. "You still believe in purpose?" She nodded. "Even if I have to bleed for it." He folded the deed and placed it in his boot. "Then let's make damn sure this land remembers our names." Outside, the snow kept falling, soft, relentless, silent. But beneath it, something fierce was starting to rise. The snow melted slower that year, as if reluctant to release what it had hidden. Blood, boot prints, broken promises, it had covered them all in silence. But the wind hadn't forgotten. And neither had Eli. Florence moved slower in the mornings now. The wound on her side had healed, but something in her gait had changed. She carried her weight with care, like the earth beneath her might shift if she stepped too hard. Eli offered to take more chores, but she waved him off each time. She still wanted to stand on her own. They spent the days reinforcing the barn, hammering shutters, digging shallow trenches just beyond the pasture line. He built a smoke signal on the roof from old crates, packed with pine needles and kerosene. Every trap was checked twice. Every night, he counted ammunition like a prayer. On the 6th morning, a rider appeared. One man. No hat. Long coat that whipped in the prairie wind. Same red scarf knotted at the throat. Eli saw him through the spyglass. He didn't raise his gun. Not yet. The man dismounted and stood still. Florence stepped onto the porch with a slow breath. "He's not here to talk." "I figured," Eli said. She turned to him, hands trembling for the first time. "There's one thing I didn't show you." They went inside. She led him to the locked room once more. This time, she knelt beside a floorboard near the hearth and pulled it loose with an iron hook. Beneath it, wrapped in waxed canvas, lay a sealed envelope and a small wooden box. She handed them both to him. "If we don't survive," she said, "burn the letter. Bury the box." He opened the lid. Inside were 10 gold coins and a worn ring, the same one from her wedding portrait. But this time, he noticed something beneath it, a folded paper with a familiar seal. A military discharge. Silas Wren. Marked KIA, and stamped with a red correction, retracted. Eli froze. He lived. Long enough to come back. But not to stay. He left again? No. They came for him. Same men. Buried him in the creek when they couldn't break him. She swallowed hard. I dug him up. With my own hands. Buried him proper beneath the willow. That's where the X marks on the map. Not gold, just a grave. He looked at her, throat tight. And the coins. Leftovers. Blood money. She met his gaze, eyes wet. I let you believe there was a treasure because I needed you to stay. Needed someone who'd fight without asking what for. He didn't answer. Just set the box down carefully. Outside, the wind changed. Eli grabbed his rifle. The man with the red scarf stood alone still, but not for long. For more riders emerged from the trees. They spread out in a half circle, moving with the rhythm of men who'd killed before. One whistled. A cruel sound. Florence loaded her revolver. We hold the house. Eli adjusted the sight on his rifle. We hold each other. The first shot came fast, sharp, and clean. Eli returned fire, dropping one of the riders clean off his horse. Chaos followed. Bullets ripped into the porch railing. The windows shattered, again. Smoke rose as the dry grass caught flame from a tossed torch. Florence moved like a ghost with fire in her bones. She fired from the window, ducked, reloaded, and fired again. Eli covered the back of the house, holding the line as 2 men circled wide. A scream split the air. Then silence. Florence looked toward the barn. They're trying the back. Eli didn't hesitate. He vaulted through the kitchen door and sprinted through the snow, heart thundering. A figure lunged from behind a haystack, knife raised. Eli tackled him, both crashing into the trough. They wrestled in the mud and blood. The knife slashed his shoulder, shallow but sharp. Eli headbutted the man, grabbed a pitchfork, and drove it through his side. The man gasped, then stopped breathing. Eli stumbled to his feet, dazed, leaking blood. He turned. A shot rang out. He dropped to one knee. Smoke drifted from Florence's pistol. The last attacker by the shed fell without a sound. The only one left was the man in the red scarf. He stepped through the smoke, calm as ever. Florence stepped onto the porch to meet him. "No more men?" she asked. He tipped his head. "No more needed." "Then speak your piece." The man looked past her to Eli, limping toward them. "I see you married well." Florence narrowed her eyes. "I didn't marry for looks." The man grinned, pulled his gun, and aimed. Eli fired first. The shot cracked through the wind, and the man jerked back, his scarf blooming red. He fell to the ground, arms outstretched, face to the sky like he was waiting for it to rain. It didn't. Afterward, the silence returned. But it was different now. Lighter. Florence sat on the porch steps, blood on her sleeve, boots muddy. Eli sat beside her. They watched the smoke fade. "I lied to you," she said after a while. "I know. You stayed anyway." He looked at her. "You gave me something worth staying for." She smiled. "You never asked what." "I didn't have to." The next morning, they buried the men behind the barn, unmarked. The red scarf went into the fire. They didn't speak much. Just worked side by side, silent in the cold. Afterward, Florence took the sealed letter and held it over the fire. It curled black, turned to ash, and was gone. Eli didn't ask what it said. He didn't need to. Spring came slow. Grass pushed through thawing dirt. The wind carried new scents: honeysuckle, pine sap, and something else. Possibility. Eli rebuilt the fence, plank by plank. Florence painted again. A new canvas each week. One morning, she didn't come down for coffee. He found her in her chair by the window, hands folded over her lap, breath stilled. The fire had gone cold. Beside her sat the final painting. It showed him, standing at the porch, a rifle on his back, Florence beside him, their shadows stretching across the land. The sky above them wasn't stormy. It was gold. He buried her beneath the willow. The same tree marked on the map. Where love, not treasure, had been buried all along. The land stayed quiet after that. Visitors came and went, none with guns. He never dug for gold. Never needed to. When people asked him why he stayed in a house built with secrets, he'd say, because some stories deserve to be remembered where they happened. And when the wind blew through the hills, whispering through the wildflowers and broken boards, he swore it carried her voice still, steadier than silence, stronger than grief, and more enduring than gold.
It wasn't thunder that made Annie Oakley flinch, it was the sound of spurs on wood. Sharp, measured, too slow to belong to any decent man. The porch creaked under his boots, and the dog tied to the post slunk low and whimpered. Annie Oakley stood in the corner of the cabin, arms around her youngest brother, her face pale as bone dust. Her father didn't bother to hide the bottle in his hand when he opened the door. "Silas," he said, grinning through a gap-toothed mouth. "Right on time." The outlaw didn't smile. He never did. His eyes swept the room like a hawk circling something half-dead. He wasn't old in years, but life had burned the youth out of his face. His jaw was covered in patchy stubble, and his coat still carried blood stains that hadn't faded despite the dust of the road. Annie Oakley didn't look up, but she could feel him staring. Her father motioned to the kitchen table, already set with 2 chipped mugs. "Let's talk." Silas didn't sit. He leaned one hand on the edge of the table and said flatly, "Is she ready?" Annie Oakley's heart punched her ribs. "She will be," her father said, pouring a drink. "Just needs a little persuasion. I don't pay for broken goods." Annie Oakley's hand tightened on her brother's. She wanted to scream, but her voice had dried up days ago. Her mother used to say, "Don't let him see you break, Annie Oakley. Don't you dare." That voice haunted her now, long gone like the wind after a storm. Silas looked her way, his eyes resting too long. "She got a name?" Her father scoffed. "Names don't matter. She'll do what she's told." That was it. No protests. No hesitation. Her life, traded like a sack of cornmeal. Silas walked closer, the floorboards moaning under his weight. He stopped just a foot away from Annie Oakley. Her breath froze in her chest. He reached out, took her chin between 2 fingers, and turned her face toward the fading light. "No scars. That's something," he muttered, then dropped his hand like she was already his property. She didn't blink. She wouldn't give him that. A minute later, a folded bundle of dollars landed on the table. Her father snatched it up faster than he'd ever hugged her. He didn't count it, just held it like it warmed his filthy soul. "When do you want her gone?" he asked. "Tonight," Silas said. "Before sundown." The cabin spun around Annie Oakley, but she didn't move. She had expected this. Maybe not the day, not the hour, but the moment had been creeping like rot in the beams for months now. Since her father lost the last herd, since the whiskey debt came calling, since folks in town stopped looking her in the eye. She packed in silence. Not much to take. One faded dress. A wooden comb. Her mother's locket with no picture inside. Her middle brother, Elias, tried to follow her out, crying. She knelt and kissed his cheek, whispering, "Watch over the others." He nodded like he understood, though he couldn't have been more than 7. Her father didn't even say goodbye. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the smell of manure and rust. Silas waited by a black gelding, holding the reins to a second horse, saddled with a plain bedroll and a pair of worn saddlebags. "Mount up," he ordered. Annie Oakley hesitated. She looked back once, just once. The door to the shack stood half open. Her brothers and sisters peered out like ghosts behind ragged curtains. Her father was already gone from sight. She climbed onto the horse. They rode in silence through the low hills. The sun bled red across the horizon, slicing through the sparse trees like fire. Silas didn't speak. He didn't look at her. He just rode, rigid, alert, his hand always near the revolver on his belt. Annie Oakley's legs ached, but she didn't complain. The silence between them was a fence she didn't dare touch. As night came down, they reached a plateau scattered with rocks and dried sagebrush. There stood a crooked house, a lopsided structure made of sun-bleached boards and rusted tin, surrounded by a fence strung with rope and bones. Animal bones, she hoped. "You'll sleep inside," Silas said, pointing with his chin. "Don't touch nothing that ain't yours." Inside it smelled of meat grease and gun oil. A deer skull hung above the fireplace. One room, one bed. A stove that hissed. A table with blood on the leg. No windows. Only a door that creaked like a dying tree. "Your room's the pantry," Silas said. She stepped in. Shelves lined with canned peaches, jerky, old beans. No window. Just 4 walls and a bolt on the outside. He closed the door behind her. The bolt clicked. Annie Oakley didn't cry. She sat on the wooden floor and touched the locket around her neck. The silence was worse than the fear. By the 3rd day she'd learned the rules. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't leave the house. Don't stare at the men when they came. And never, ever, ask about the locked chest under the floorboards. The only kindness was the dog. A gray mongrel missing one eye. He never barked. Just lay beside the stove and watched her with sad eyes. She fed him scraps when she could. It made her feel human. Once she heard Silas laughing with his men. She didn't know he could laugh. They were talking about her, about what a good deal she was. About how she'd tame easy. Her stomach twisted, but she didn't move. Didn't give them anything. That night she slipped a spoon into her apron. Not as a weapon. Just to know she had something no one gave her. A week later she met him. Jesse called her. He wasn't supposed to be there. He was just passing through, driving cattle south looking for a strayed calf. Annie Oakley was hanging laundry on a crooked wire when he rode by, hat low, eyes scanning the land. Their eyes met. Just a second. But it was enough. He tipped his hat. She didn't smile, but she didn't look away. The next day he came again. Left a cloth bag on the fence post. Inside it, salt, a small knife, and a folded piece of paper. She didn't read the note until night. It said, "If you need help, leave a ribbon." She had no ribbon. But she tore a strip from her only spare dress. The next morning she tied it to the post. That night Silas found it. He didn't say a word. Just stared at it for a long time. Then he turned and walked back toward the house. She heard the gun being cocked. The pantry door creaked open before dawn. Annie Oakley woke with a start, clutching the spoon she kept hidden in her sleeve. It was instinct now. A habit born of fear, not usefulness. Silas stood in the doorway, a silhouette against the flickering firelight. His voice was calm, but something cold coiled beneath the surface. "Put on your boots," he said. "You're coming with me today." She rose without a word, heart thudding, hands steady from sheer will. Outside, the hills yawned beneath a leaden sky. A storm had passed in the night, leaving behind damp air and the scent of pine. Annie Oakley walked 3 paces behind Silas as they rode into the hills, her fingers frozen around the reins of a stubborn mule. Neither of them spoke, not even when the wind howled across the rocks like it wanted to carry secrets away. By midday they reached a stretch of scorched land, burned brush, blackened trees, a creek that barely trickled. "This here," Silas said, dismounting, "was once a town." Annie Oakley stared at the charred remnants of wooden frames and half-buried glass bottles. "They crossed me," he added. She said nothing. "You know what I did?" She didn't answer. He turned, his face carved with shadow. "I made sure nobody else did." He kicked at the ashes, then looked at her like he was trying to measure how much fear she had left. Back at the ranch, his gang had gathered, 5 men, all mean-eyed and sunburnt, passing around liquor and stories that stank of blood. One of them, a short man with missing fingers, glanced at Annie Oakley and said, "Boss should let her smile more. Pretty thing like that shouldn't be wasted on silence." Silas didn't respond. But that night, Annie Oakley found the pantry bolt drawn tighter than ever before. The next morning she woke to whispers. "They say a rancher sniffing around. Quiet fella. From down near Dry Creek." Annie Oakley's pulse fluttered. Jesse called her. It was real. Not just a dream. She hadn't seen him since that second ride past the fence line, but something about his presence had lingered in the air, like the promise of rain after drought. 2 days later the dog barked. She rushed to the window and caught a flash of motion. A bag hanging off the fence post. This time, it was a folded leather pouch with a canteen, a flint striker, and a note carved into a piece of birch bark. Run north if it turns bad. I'll find you. That night, Annie Oakley couldn't sleep. She replayed every moment, every crack in Silas's voice, every look from his men. She'd lived in cages before, her father's silence, her mother's grave, the walls of this pantry. But this was the first time she understood something terrifying. The cage didn't need bars if you never saw the door. The next morning she slipped the pouch into her apron, just in case. By sundown, Silas was drunk. He sat by the fire, gun across his lap, staring at the flames like they were whispering to him. He said almost absently, "You talk to that rancher again? I'll carve his name into your skin before I kill him." She met his gaze. For the first time she didn't flinch. And that was the moment something in him snapped. He threw his cup across the room, rose and stomped toward her. The dog growled. She backed into the corner, but Silas didn't strike her. He just leaned in, his breath thick with whiskey and rot. "You belong to me." Then he walked out and slammed the door. She waited an hour. When the fire was low and the snoring started, she stepped into her boots, slid open the pantry door. The dog lifted his head, ears twitching. She pressed a hand to his muzzle. "Stay," she whispered. "You don't owe me anything." He didn't follow. She slipped through the back, past the creaky fence and the sleeping horses. Every twig beneath her feet sounded like thunder. But no voices rose. No shots rang out. She ran. Up the ridge. Across the old goat trail. Past the hollow tree and into the brush where Jesse had said to go. By sunrise her feet bled and her lungs burned. But she kept moving. It wasn't just fear driving her. It was fury. It was the memory of her father counting blood money. The sound of Silas laughing about the town he burned. The way every man she'd ever known thought silence meant surrender. At the river bend she collapsed. She pulled the canteen from the pouch and drank until the world stopped spinning. Then she heard hooves. Her body tensed. The dog? No, a horse. She ducked behind a boulder, clutching the tiny knife. Then a voice, low, calm, unmistakable. "Annie Oakley?" She stood slowly. Jesse sat atop a brown gelding, rifle across his lap, eyes scanning the tree-line. "You made it," he said. She nodded, speechless. He dismounted, offered her his coat. She didn't take it. "I'm not cold," she said. He gave her a long look. "You're lying." "Am I?" Jesse nodded once. Everyone lies when they're escaping something. She let him wrap the coat around her shoulders. Only then did she shiver. He led her to a hidden trail, up into the hills. His ranch wasn't far. Just over the ridge, nestled between rock and pine, protected by a creek that split into a narrow ravine. It looked like peace, simple, weather-beaten but honest. Inside there were no locked doors. No bloodstains. Just clean air and wooden beams. Jesse gave her space. A room of her own. A bed. She stared at it like it might disappear. He made stew. She didn't eat much, but she watched him move, quiet and careful. Not like someone afraid, but like someone who understood pain didn't heal when stared at. Later, when she sat by the fire, Jesse spoke. "You're not safe yet." "I know. He'll come for you. I'm counting on it." He raised an eyebrow. "Silas doesn't like loose ends," she said. "And I'm not going to die running." Jesse nodded slowly. "Then you'd better learn how to shoot." She looked at the rifle on the wall. "I've never fired one." He got up, took it down and handed it to her. "It's not about the aim," he said. "It's about the resolve." She held the rifle. It felt heavier than she expected. Real. Final. Jesse stepped back. "Tomorrow we start with cans," he said. "Then bottles. Then whatever moves." Annie Oakley didn't smile, but a spark lit in her eyes. She whispered, "Thank you." He didn't say "You're welcome." He said, "Don't thank me yet." Outside, thunder rolled far off. The storm hadn't begun. It was only warning them it was coming. The first shot Annie Oakley ever took missed wide, but the sound of it rang louder than any scream she'd ever let loose. Jesse didn't flinch. "Better to miss while you're learning than freeze when it matters," he said, eyes still on the tin can. Annie Oakley lowered the rifle, breath shaky. Her fingers tingled from the kickback. "I thought it'd feel clearer. Like the moment would tell me what I'm made of." Jesse walked to her side, picked up the can and set it back on the stump. "The moment doesn't tell you anything. You do." They trained at dawn when the fog still blanketed the ridge like a quilt. Jesse taught her how to breathe before each shot, how to let go of fear without letting go of caution. She wasn't a natural, but she was relentless. Annie Oakley didn't want to learn to shoot for vengeance. She wanted it for freedom. Each night, Jesse watched the ridgeline before dousing the lamps. Silas hadn't shown yet, but Jesse knew men like him. They didn't let things go. They circled, waited for weakness, then struck when the air went quiet. Annie Oakley spent her nights staring at the ceiling beams. She didn't lock the door, Jesse never asked her to, but she wedged a chair beneath the knob anyway. Habit. It was easier to sleep when she felt like the world couldn't crack open so easily. On the fourth morning she woke before the rooster. The dog had returned. She found him outside the barn, ribs showing, a scar along his side. He wagged his tail once, then limped toward her. Jesse stepped out, rifle in hand. "Friend of yours?" Annie Oakley dropped to her knees, tears burning behind her eyes. She hadn't cried in days, but the sight of that dog, scarred, hungry, loyal, undid her. "He followed me when I ran," she said. "I told him to stay. Looks like he didn't listen." "Neither did I." Jesse gave the dog a slab of meat and said, "That's two of you who don't quit easy." By midday the wind shifted. Jesse noticed it first. The animals quieted. Even the trees stilled. "They're coming." "How do you know?" He pointed toward the ridge. "Birds are gone. And there's smoke. Far off. A signal." Annie Oakley's fingers went cold around the rifle. "How many?" "Too many for a polite conversation. Maybe 5. 6 with Silas. They had hours. Maybe less." Jesse walked the perimeter, checking traps and loading ammunition. Annie Oakley followed close behind. "No panic. No tears. Only focus." "You sure you want to be here for this?" he asked. "I ran once. I won't again." He paused, studied her. Then he nodded once, firm. They didn't fortify the ranch with walls. That would have only drawn attention. Instead, Jesse used terrain, tight passes, tall rocks, hidden angles where rifles could speak before footsteps could. They dug in at twilight. The sun bled into the hills. The silence felt heavier than any noise. Annie Oakley waited near the north slope, behind the woodpile. The dog lay beside her, growling low. Jesse crouched near the corral, his rifle steady on a forked rest. His expression was unreadable, but his posture said one thing. He'd done this before. The first figure appeared just as the moon rose, a shadow against the ridge, horse slow and silent. Then another. And another. They didn't call out. Didn't announce themselves. They thought they were hunting prey. Annie Oakley steadied her rifle. One rider dismounted, creeping toward the barn. Jesse fired. The man dropped. Gunfire exploded. Muzzle flashes lit the brush. Horses screamed. Men shouted curses as shots cracked through the air. Annie Oakley fired once, missed. Then again. This time, a man screamed and stumbled into the dirt. A rush of noise. Silas's voice cutting through. "That's enough." The shooting paused. A tense stillness stretched like rawhide. "Annie Oakley," Silas called. "Come out now and I'll let the rancher live. Make me chase you and I'll gut him like a deer." Annie Oakley stood slowly, rifle raised. "I'm not property, Silas. You're mine." "No," she said. "You bought my silence. I'm done being quiet." He stepped into the open, gun in one hand, a sneer on his lips. "You won't shoot me," he said. She did. The shot hit his shoulder. He staggered, howled, fired wildly into the trees. Jesse returned fire, hitting one of Silas's men square in the chest. Another rider bolted. Only 2 remained, Silas, bleeding, and a scarred man limping toward the barn. Jesse rushed forward, knife drawn. A brutal fight unfolded, grunts, the clang of steel, fists pounding flesh. Annie Oakley watched from above the root cellar, rifle shaking in her grip. Then Silas lunged from the shadows, tackling Jesse. They crashed into the mud, rolling. Annie Oakley moved before she thought. Down the hill. Toward the fight. The rifle too long, too slow. She grabbed Jesse's revolver from where it had fallen. Silas saw her too late. She didn't hesitate. One shot. Straight through the thigh. He screamed, fell backward, reaching for his knife. Jesse finished it. A final blow. Brutal. Final. Then silence. Not the kind that haunts, but the kind that heals. Jesse leaned back, chest heaving. Annie Oakley knelt beside him, face pale, lips trembling. "I thought I was too late," she said. "You weren't." He took her hand. Neither let go. The dog limped up beside them, tail wagging weakly. They buried the bodies by dawn. No speeches. No prayers. Just dirt and silence and the knowledge that evil, at least this time, hadn't won. Back at the cabin, Jesse poured coffee and handed her a cup. Annie Oakley stared into it. What happens now? She asked. Jessie looked out the window. The wind had shifted again. The air smelled like pine. That depends, he said. You want to stay? She nodded once. I want to live. He smiled. Then softly, then we begin again. The storm broke 3 days later, not in the sky but inside Annie Oakley. She stood by the ridge watching the sunrise pour molten light over the hills. The land had changed. Or maybe she had. It no longer looked like a prison. It looked like a promise. Behind her, Jesse chopped wood in silence. He hadn't spoken much since the fight. Not out of grief, he wasn't mourning the dead. He was giving space to the living. Annie Oakley didn't know what to do with peace. It was heavier than fear, quieter than rage. It settled in her bones like something unfamiliar. She hadn't lived this far into a story before. Jesse joined her, wiping sweat from his brow. They'll come asking, he said. The sheriff? He nodded. Silas had bounties. His men too. Might even be a reward. She looked out over the valley. I don't want coin for killing. You won't get any guilt from me. Then what will I get? He hesitated. Then, whatever you decide to take. Annie Oakley turned toward him. There was a bruise beneath his eye, a gash on his cheek, and a weariness in his shoulders. But he stood with the kind of quiet strength that didn't demand attention. It just filled the space. I want a new name, she said softly. One that's mine. Jesse smiled, slow and warm. Any idea what it is? I'll let you know when I earn it. They spent the next week rebuilding what Silas's fire had nearly destroyed. Fences were mended. Tools cleaned. The dog, now named Flint, claimed the porch as his kingdom. Annie Oakley planted seeds in a garden bed that hadn't been used in years. She liked the feel of dirt under her nails. It reminded her that things could grow even here. The townsfolk came by eventually. Curious, cautious. They heard whispers as towns always did. A few offered condolences. Some offered suspicion. One man tried to pry with questions Annie Oakley didn't answer. But the women, the widows, the sisters, the ones with bruises they never explained, they looked at Annie Oakley differently. Not with pity. With something like respect. Jesse stood beside her through it all. Not as a shield. As a witness. One evening, as fireflies blinked above the pasture, he handed her a folded paper. It was a marriage license. Blank. Annie Oakley looked at it, then at him. You're asking? I'm offering, he said. You don't owe me a yes. She held it in both hands. The last time a man tied her name to a contract, it was in exchange for blood money and silence. This was different. She placed the paper on the table, then took his hand. I want vows that mean something, she said. Then let's write our own. They did. The ceremony was quiet. Just them, the dog, and a sky full of stars. Jesse wore his Sunday shirt, the one without holes. Annie Oakley wore her mother's locket, now holding a dried wildflower instead of a picture. She'd picked it from the ridge where she first ran. Jesse took her hands in his, voice steady. I vow to never speak over your silence, or ask you to shrink so I can feel tall. Annie Oakley's eyes shone, but no tears fell. I vow to never run from storms, she said, because I know now, I can ride through them. No rings. Just a kiss and a fire shared between them. The next morning she added her name to the barn ledger. Not Hutchins. Not Cray. Annie Oakley called her. Not given. Chosen. Time passed as it does in places where pain once lived. Not quickly. Not cleanly. But it passed. She still startled at certain noises. Still checked the lock twice before bed. But she laughed more. She sang to the hens. She built shelves in the pantry she once feared. Sometimes Jesse would find her sitting on the porch, staring at the horizon. Looking for something? He'd ask. No, she'd say. Just making sure it's still mine. And it was. Then came the rider. Dusty coat. Travel-worn face. He carried a telegram and a look of apology. Trouble in Dodge, he said. Old friends of Silas. Looking for revenge. Annie Oakley didn't flinch. How many? Too many to count. They've got iron and fire in their pockets. Jesse looked to her. She didn't wait. We'll meet them halfway. They rode out before sunrise. 2 horses. 1 dog. And a pass that refused to stay buried. At a narrow pass, Jesse laid the trap. He knew the land better than most men knew their own scars. Annie Oakley found her perch behind a thicket of rocks, rifle loaded, breath even. When the outlaws came, they rode with noise, yelling, shooting into the air, confident. That was their first mistake. The second was underestimating a woman who had nothing left to fear. The first shot dropped their lead. The second scattered the rest. Jessie picked off those who circled. Annie Oakley took out the ones too slow to run. When the dust cleared, only one remained, a young man barely grown, shaking as he dropped his pistol. "Please," he begged. Annie Oakley lowered her rifle. "Go," she said. "And tell the others, we're not ghosts. We're fire." The boy fled without looking back. Jessie exhaled slowly. "That'll buy us time." Annie Oakley nodded. "Long enough to plant more seeds." They returned home to a red sky and open gates. She untacked the horses. Jessie fed the dog. Routine. Familiar. At supper he raised his cup. "To peace." She smiled. "To earn peace." And when they kissed, it wasn't to forget the past. It was to honor the fact that they had survived it. That night, under a sky so clear it looked like glass, Annie Oakley sat alone by the fire. Flint lay curled at her feet. Jessie was inside, humming an old tune. She looked to the stars and whispered, "Mama, I made it." The wind rustled the trees, soft and full. The fire cracked like laughter. And for the first time in her life, Annie Oakley didn't feel like a survivor. She felt like someone who had begun.